We have a very, very interesting panel to talk about with you today, all about investing in Hawaii. And this panel is going to explore how the regulatory and government framework helps or hinders energy development in Hawaii, and ultimately answer the question, why is Hawaii a good investment, and what can we do to make it even better? Murray Clay joined Ulupono Initiative in 2011 as its managing director, and since 2013 has served as its managing partner. In his current role, Mr. Clay manages all aspects of operations and investments for Ulupono Initiative, a for-profit impact investment firm dedicated to sustainability in Hawaii.
So when I was talking with my staff a few weeks ago about how it seems that a lot of ratepayers are tending to get a little bit comfortable these days with the currently low oil prices, I used the analogy, it's like boiling a frog. And I found that about half my staff had no idea what that meant. So I described how the story goes that you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water and it jumps out right away. But if you put a frog into a pot of cool water and slowly turn up the heat, the frog gets cooked before it knows anything is wrong. So we're hoping that folks in Hawaii do not become the frog. Don't get too comfortable. Because we're making some really important decisions right now. We're deciding on the merger, on whether or not we bring LNG to Hawaii, on the power supply improvement plans and other things, and it's a bad time to get comfortable with currently low fossil fuel prices. Now most ratepayers, we think, feel like this about taking risk. If they're going to take risk, they want to have insurance. The vast majority of people in Hawaii, more than 90% have health insurance, more than 80% have auto insurance. Almost all Americans have insurance of some kind because people would rather pay a fixed, predictable monthly price, their insurance premium, rather than be at risk for huge financial shocks. And yet, we know ratepayers bear 100% of the risk of fuel prices. And the only thing that we have that approximates insurance is fixed price renewable energy. So in the past, I've presented in other energy conferences about this Monte Carlo analysis I did. Now, Monte Carlo, without going into a lot of details, is just a way to take past volatility of an asset like oil or natural gas and use it to talk about probabilities for future prices instead of just drawing a single price line. You talk about what probabilities you could have. And so I tried to use that to solve for what the break-even price for renewables would be. Now, in the September Energy Conference on Oahu, that number, based on data as of the end of last year, I should say December 2014, was 14 cents per kilowatt hour versus LNG. Now, that was sort of good news because the waiver projects were coming out right about 14 cents per kilowatt hour, so the message then was, hey, looks like renewables are doing pretty well and they can actually compete against LNG on a risk-adjusted basis. Now, when you update that through the third quarter of last year, which is the most recent data I had when I ran the update, that number drops down to 9.5 cents per kilowatt hour because of the lower oil prices. Now that's a concern because that's roughly on par with the cheapest power source that we have in Hawaii right now, which, as I understand, is the AES coal plant. It's about the same price. So that causes us some concern. However, that analysis is done assuming 1 million tons per year of LNG would be imported. And that's kind of assuming that you convert all the oil over to gas and you convert over most of your generators. If you take a more modest number and assume that you don't use quite as much LNG and you kind of ramp that down a little bit more quickly, then it works out to be about 10.5 cents per kilowatt hour as the break-even price for renewables. Now, for a lot of the developers out there, that might still cause you concern because you're thinking, okay, we're coming in at 14 now, 10.5 is obviously lower than that. But keep in mind that just 5 years ago, solar PPA prices were about 24 cents per kilowatt hour. Doesn't mean they'll go down another 10 cents in 5 years, but can we do 3.5 cents over the next several years? Yeah, I think we might be able to do that. Now, if you look at oil and diesel, it's better news. It's 20.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which essentially means that we've more or less beaten oil and diesel for renewable energy, although I do understand that prices on oil have come down further since the third quarter of last year. But in general, it looks like we're doing pretty well against oil and diesel. Okay, so when I talk about the break-even price, that's simply the probability that you save money with renewables versus LNG versus renewables costing you more money than LNG. It's 50-50. It's an even bet at that price. And although it's an even bet on probabilities, it's not an even bet on magnitudes. So if you take the 600 kilowatt hour kind of average customer bill, use that 10.5 cent break-even price, and you look at the extreme ends, like if natural gas moves a lot up or down, then it's kind of lopsided. So if you take the 10% lowest set of simulations, lowest simulated prices for LNG, then renewables could cost you about $1,138 as a ratepayer over that 15-year period of using LNG, more than if you just used all LNG. So that's where you could kind of lose money if LNG is very low. With that same 10% cutoff, but this time looking at the 10% highest LNG prices, you could actually save $3,282 over that 15 years with renewables. So I hope the message is here that it's very lopsided at that break-even price in favor of renewables. You can save more than you can lose, so to speak, based on the volatility of the underlying asset. So it's still a very good bet. So I was also asked to comment on whether or not Hawaii is a good place to invest in terms of the sort of the system here, the policy, regulation, entitlements, and things of that nature. On the policy front, as you can probably guess from the presentation I've done thus far, whether or not we import LNG is one of the single biggest policy questions. And I realize the governor has already answered that question, but this question's sort of still out there in a lot of people's minds. So the second really important question is if we bring it in, how much? Because that will affect how competitive renewables can be. Now the good news is we do have the 100% renewable energy goal. But I pose the question here, are we serious? There's a lot of really good renewable energy legislation every year that fails to pass. Entitlements take a really, really long time for renewable energy projects, even if they're fairly benign. And so, sometimes you wonder how serious we are. And as just one case in point in where some elements of state policy may not be fully in alignment with that 100% renewable energy goal, last year there was an RFP, a state procurement, going through the state procurement process for air conditioning services for state buildings. And in that process, 100 points, the decision was based on this 100-point scoring system, and of that 100 points, 5 points was for a project being renewable. So 5% of the decision was based on renewable, versus 100% renewable energy goal, so that might be out of alignment. On the regulatory front and in terms of market mechanisms, although we are making some progress in some areas, there are still a number of areas that are currently sort of underdeveloped. So what's the value of ancillary services, of energy storage? There's still some smart grid, time of use, and demand response issues we need to figure out. Some of that is just a little underdeveloped at this point, which slows some things down. And in terms of the RFP to PPA to PUC approval process, and entitlements, it just takes a really long time in Hawaii versus other places, and I'll go into that in more detail in the next slide. So it's been our perspective that projects seem to take a lot longer in Hawaii than elsewhere, but we wanted to get a less biased view of that, not just Ulupono's view. So we did a survey amongst renewable energy developers that do projects in Hawaii and California and asked them their experience in developing projects in Hawaii versus California, and this is all based on their responses. So the RFP submission to decision timeline, 1 month to 2 years in Hawaii versus 2 to 3 months in California. The beginning of negotiations with the utility to the actual signing of the PPA, 4 months to 3 years in Hawaii versus 3 months in California. Approval by the PUC, 3 to 13 months in Hawaii versus 3 to 4 months in California. Entitlements, here's the doozy. 6 months to 6 years in Hawaii versus 3 to 4 months in California. Now, to be fair, there are California projects, especially the larger ones, that took a lot longer than that, but this is kind of Hawaii-sized projects, 20, 30, 40 megawatt type stuff. So the total works out to be 14 months to 12 years in Hawaii versus 11 to 14 months in California. So if you didn't already know, and I know everyone here does know, if you were asked to guess which state has the 100% renewable energy goal, most people would guess California looking at this, so we can do better than that. The problem is all policy, regulatory, entitlement, all this risk adds up to financial risk, which increases the cost of these projects by millions of dollars. Those costs are passed on to the ratepayer through a higher PPA price that has to be recovered, or if those longer timelines, those additional costs aren't discovered until after the PPA is negotiated, the developer is essentially burned and they leave Hawaii. I've had several developers tell me confidentially they're leaving Hawaii because they've been burned too many times on this. That means less developers, less competition, higher prices. So we have this vicious circle, which is a self-inflicted wound on making projects take too much time, costing too much money, which raises the price of renewable energy when we're trying to compete against cheap fossil fuels. It doesn't need to be this way. So I throw this slide up here as what we might picture in our minds as the bridge to our renewable energy future, this nice, broad, straight bridge with this beautiful destination in mind. This is how we might picture it in our minds. But when developers try to actually develop a renewable energy project in Hawaii, this is the bridge they're faced with, a rope bridge in the fog. It's shaky, it's wobbly, it's dangerous, and you can't even see the destination and if the end is in sight. So here's another bridge. This is the Haleiwa Bridge. And this bridge has the additional concern of, you see 112 megawatts of solar, 25 megawatts of geothermal, 21.5 megawatts of biomass to energy, and 10 million gallons of biofuels being pitched off the bridge. So in the interest of fair disclosure, Ulupono is an investor in that last one, Hawaii Bioenergy. But I want to make it really clear that these projects, whatever the reasons are, these are not project suicides. They did not jump from the bridge, they were actually pushed. So that's a concern. In fact, we are so concerned about it that we have seen the PUC asking some really good questions about that, so we know that they're on the ball here. But we had enough concern about that, we actually had our lawyers conduct an independent third-party legal analysis of the Sun Edison projects in particular, since they're the biggest ones, and we do have no financial interest in that project. And they found, I'll cut out all the legal stuff, essentially if a financially viable third party were to offer to buy the projects at fair market value, and that's the key, fair market value, there is no legally justifiable reason for that PPA to be canceled. And so we just need to put that out there. We have just recently learned that such an offer is on the table and filed just very recently with the PUC. So hopefully you'll see a trampoline under some of these projects and they bounce back up onto the bridge. But once you get across that long, scary bridge, we just certainly don't want to see them get pushed off at the end. So in summary, is Hawaii a good place to invest? I've given you some negative things, but on the positive side, we have great renewable energy resources. We have higher than average energy prices in Hawaii. We do have a 100% renewable energy goal, so the policy goal is right. And we have very broad support from the public, from environmentalists, and so forth. On the negative side, currently, the utilities' incentives to increase rate base are not in alignment with the ratepayers' incentive to have fixed price renewables. There is a lot of challenges still, although a lot of them are being worked out on the regulatory side. Entitlements take far too long in Hawaii, just far too long. And perhaps one of the biggest ones is that small, not in my backyard, if you will, groups can stop projects that are clearly in the public interest. And again, we can do better than that. Thank you.
One of the things that you did bring up during your presentation was the discussion on LNG, and obviously it's been an issue in Hawaii that's been percolating for quite some time. But given, Ulupono's initiative to promote renewables, why is Ulupono looking into the value of LNG for Hawaii?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually told someone this morning that I had a friend after I presented at the September Energy Conference on Oahu and I showed all these billions of dollars of savings that LNG could give us. They looked at me and they said, "When did you start working for the gas company?" And I said, "No, I still work for Ulupono. We're still renewable energy focused. But we think it's important to not choose your facts and choose your data based on your position, but to do the best, most rigorous financial analysis you can do on a question, regardless of your position, and then figure out how what you want or what your position is can work in light of the facts and the data." And so even though we're pushing very hard for renewable energy, we think that the debate over LNG should be based on facts. It should take into account volatility. It should look at alternatives, whether they're better or worse. And yeah, some people worried that Ulupono was going to be carrying the flag for fossil fuels, and that's not the case. But we do want to do, fair analysis.
Hearing the innovation side, hearing, large developers that had happened, and then the regulatory. As a social investing, organization, how do you see all of these things starting to come together for Hawaii? And, is Hawaii that good investment? Are there going to be those opportunities in there for investing, not just for energy developers who want to come here, but people who actually want to invest in the developers that are actually coming here?
So I do see a lot of opportunities, and there are some really innovative companies. Energy Accelerator was mentioned, and we've invested in some of those. In fact, we view that as sort of a prep school, if you will, in some ways for some of Ulupono's investment considerations. There are opportunities here. I would say that if I compare Hawaii to my previous private equity career on the East Coast, that before I did kind of more filter feeding, because, which sounds unattractive, but filter feeding is there's all these deals going by in the deal flow, and you just filter out the best ones, and you do those, and you don't have to do a lot of work. You get so many calls every day for the next deal. As long as you can pick better ones out of the mix, you're okay. In Hawaii, you have to be more proactive than that. So the opportunities are there. You got to go out and find them. You got to go out and meet these people. You got to look at the technologies. You got to, we have to take these different meetings, these different companies, different relationships, and bring them together. Oftentimes the people that know what needs to be done are there, but they need to be brought together. And we have had the opportunity to do that on a number of occasions, whether it's Energy Accelerator, folks that are coming to us, even with grant funding, we do grants as well. Some folks aren't quite ready for the investment, but there's ways to help get them to the next stage. And I think there is a lot of opportunity in Hawaii. The natural sort of basic benefits or potential that Hawaii has is so large that we're willing to work to overcome these difficulties that we talked about. And I think there is an opportunity to do that.
So in your comparison with California and the length of time it takes in California versus Hawaii, I was wondering if there were any specific requirements Hawaii was inserting that perhaps was contributing to the length of time.
I think, and I will give the disclaimer that since that information was survey-based, it's not necessarily a scientific examination of every project that's been done in Hawaii versus California, but just the developer's experience. But I think based on my less knowledgeable side on California, I think that in some cases some of the PPA language and RFP language is more streamlined. It's maybe a little bit more standardized across technology in some cases, a little bit easier to respond to. In some cases, some of the RFPs might be more appropriate and sort of straightforward in terms of the technology and not asking a technology to do something that it's not really appropriate for that technology to do. I think in some cases, I mean, I think Lorraine could probably wax poetic about the size of the Hawaii PUC and the staff and budget versus the California.
About a cast of thousands versus 45.
Exactly, and that's the truth. So, and you know, what is it? I think last I heard it was somewhere around half of the PUC's special fund gets taken for the general fund. So, if you want the PUC to be quicker and do their job better, we need to fund them and not take their money away for one thing.
If you could sum up and just maybe in a 1-minute conversation, what do you think about investing in Hawaii, and what is it going to take?
An answer just occurred to me that is probably going to seem like it's completely off topic from my presentation, but when I think about the various stakeholders, and even on this panel we've got developers, investors, regulators, business economic development, and tourism. In the audience we have other members of state government, other developers, the public, environmentalists. And oftentimes we say the utility, but let's remember we have at least two. We have, both electricity and gas. And so we've got all these different stakeholders. They all have their different interests. I think at a very basic level, what we need is to redefine courage in many ways in Hawaii. And I don't say that because it's very high-minded and whatever, but people think it takes courage to disagree. We all have our different incentives and different positions. It takes some courage to disagree. It doesn't take much courage to cover your ears and shout at someone when you disagree. That takes very little courage. It takes a lot of courage to sit down with someone you have deep disagreements with and talk with them, negotiate with them, have a transparent discussion, not just a polite discussion, a meaningful discussion about the facts, and actually allow your own views to be challenged. Maybe the other side has a point, and actually get through these tough things rather than fight everything out. It does not have to all be fought out in a docket or in a court case or something like that. We can work these things out, I think, faster than we have been. And I think if everyone would think of courage as the ability to talk with someone you deeply disagree with and not shout at them, I think it would go a long way.
So with that, I'd like to thank again my panel and thank the audience for giving us the opportunity to stand up over here and sit here and speak. Thank you.